I have these accomplishments. Your will be done. Jesus reiterates that at the Lord's Prayer. When we humble ourselves before God, he fills us and picks us up. And what does the psalmist say? The Lord hears the cry of the poor. What does Sirach say? When the poor, the lowly, forget economic poor, of course. But we're all poor in so many ways. When the lowly pray, their prayers pierce the clouds. The more humble we are before God, the more our prayers echo before God. Before God, our intentions, whether it's our accomplishments, praying for those in need, praying for birthdays and anniversaries, praying for all the accomplishments, separations and death. We come before God and we put it all in his hands. You have a direct line to God. And Jesus comes on the scene to prove that, to enflesh that. In case we're just listening to the Old Testament, the Lord hears the cry of the poor and their prayers pierce the clouds. We have Jesus, who was able to be touched and sit with and eaten with and hung out with. Because what does God want? In Jesus, connection between us and himself. Does God lie in the clouds? Does he hang out in the skies? No, we're not Greeks. We don't believe in Mount Olympus. We don't believe in the pantheon of the Greeks. But the concept, the otherworldness of God is rooted in us. It's rooted in the caves of Lascaux, when the cave people needed to connect with the other. They did drawings on the world, on the walls, connecting themselves to the other. They didn't have a concept of what the other was, but they knew. Why? It's in us. The Spirit of the Lord is in us. He kissed us at our birth and put a soul in us. And that striving to get closer to him is rooted in us. It's natural. Sometimes you experience it in different ways, but it's all God-like. When you love somebody, really head over heels, love somebody. Whether it's a poor, whether it's your wife, husband, spouse, boyfriend, it doesn't matter. When you love somebody, you're doing God stuff. You're connecting with God. Because God is love. And when we go to the depths of ourselves and we get out of ourselves and we love someone, we look at the focus of our love, that's what God is all about. He's put that ability in us so that we can use it in our world, our material human world, but also glorify it in our spiritual connection with him. So when we love him above all else, and that takes time. You can't do that automatically. I mean, everybody says, I love God above all else. That sounds nice. The books tell you you're supposed to do it, but please, really, right? I mean, who I'm not going to do hands because there might be a thunderbolt coming down. So I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand. Who loves God above all else? But if God is the foundation of our lives, then he gives me the inspiration to love my child, my father, my mother, my sister, my brother, the poor, because he's the foundation. Then I could put it in perspective to love God above all else. Of course, it makes sense. Because to the degree that I reflect on my relationship with God and live it out in the human world, not curse the human world, live it out in the human world, I'm reflecting my relationship with God and I'm praying. It's all prayer. It's all prayer. So the book of Sirach reminds us that we have to humble ourselves, and God favors the poor. In our church, we have what we call the preferential option for the poor. What does that mean? It's rooted in Luke. It's rooted in the scriptures. It means that economic poor have to be our priority as a church, as a community, but our spiritual poor is our priority as well. We come before the Lord poor, humble, empty, and ask him to fill us. And as we are asking him to fill us with life and meaning and relationships, we fill others who cannot help themselves with life, meaning, material objects, food, relationships. It all works very well. Again, always the root of our faith is we're made in the image of God. None of it's an accident. He knows what we're doing. When Paul is quoted in this letter, and as the scripture commentator read, these letters, the pastoral letters of Paul and Titus, they were written after Paul, but they capture the life of Paul, and they put it into perspective as a teaching tool. And what he says is, right before he was dying, my life is being poured out like a libation. I've run the race. I've succeeded. So Paul is saying in his life, a libation is a liquid offering. In Greek times they used to make to the gods. So my life is being poured out before God based on how I lived it. Whether you are a father or a mother, or whether you're a teenager or a college student, whether you're a faculty member, whether you're a factory worker, as we pour out our lives before God, we're enriched. It's an offering. So you know what? When you're making the bed and cooking and driving in traffic and you're putting up with your boss, it's a libation. Offer it. Now, don't offer it like stupidly. You know, we're not cows that we have to be beaten into submission. No, there's a place of sacrifice in our lives, and Jesus was the greatest example of that. So we put up with things, and we stretch ourselves. All of it's prayer. Making the bed, working, getting on the train to go to work in the morning, doing your academics, it's all prayer if we place it before God. It's all prayer. It's a relationship from depths of myself to my connection with God. And now Jesus comes on the scene and says, listen, you know, there are a lot of people here among you. You look nice, you dress nice, you say the right things, but you're a bunch of phonies. Not you. I mean, he's talking about the scriptures. He's talking about the Pharisees. He says, 2 people go up to pray. Some people say, the commentary, 2 people went up to pray, but only one did. The Pharisees tells God how wonderful he is. Hey, God, here's my resume. You know, I do this, I fast, I pay tithes, I'm not greedy like this one over here, I don't sin publicly, I don't let anybody know who I really am. You know, see, God, you don't know how lucky you are that I'm one of your leaders in your establishment. Whiten sepulcher. The Pharisee, now you got to know why, the tax collector, you have to know why the tax collectors were sinners. They went over to the other side. Tax collectors were Jews who were hired by the Romans to collect taxes. The taxes were coins, and on the coin would be the image of the emperor. To touch something with an image was a sacrilege. So not only would they do that and go among their own people asking for the taxes from the emperor, so there's a little bit of betrayal going on there. They touch the sacrilegious object, and sometimes they put a little something in their pocket for themselves. And it was known. They were tax collectors. They were thieves, you know. Not all tax collectors are thieves, but in those days, a lot were. So Jesus says, look at this piece of trash. Look at this tax collector. Look, everybody knows he's a sinner. Pachidakana, you're a dog. You're nothing. Listen to what he says. Let's listen. Be merciful to me, a sinner. I'm sorry, God. Tax collector saying, I'm not perfect. I screw up a lot. Be merciful to me. Opening himself up so he can be filled by God. And Jesus points out to this tax collector, you don't even know his name. We don't know his name. We'll never know his name. Famous until Christ returns in glory, this public sinner is wonderful in God's eyes. This public sinner could do no wrong in the eyes of Jesus. This public sinner will go down until Jesus comes back in glory and be an example of humility. So we need to know who we are when we go before God. We need to place ourselves in his hands and develop that conversation with God continuously. You can't do it only on church on Sunday. Ain't it enough? Could you imagine breathing only for the 45 minutes on Sunday you come here? You'd be dead. No, it's not enough. We breathe and walk with God every day. And we need to be in dialogue with God every day. And that dialogue is a prayer. Yes, we have the formal prayers of the church. You all know what they are. But our own intimate relationship is a prayer. And there are many kinds of prayer. And to quote a source, I'll go back to Sister Camilla. Picture it. Jersey City, 3rd grade, Louis Scurti, about this big. Sister Camilla was a sister, Maestra P. Filipini sister from Villa Walsh. Wonderful one. And Sister Camilla used to talk with the accent, like this. And I wonder why I never grew up with an accent. I probably did, I don't even know. One day she says, we're going to talk about the prayer. Okay, good. And when you pray, you ask. So I know what that meant. When you pray, you ask, right? And she says, no. You ask. Ask is a prayer. Like, hello, Earth to Sister Camilla. We don't know what she's talking about. She writes it on the board. A-C-T-S. When you pray, you ask. What's that? Adoration, contrition, thanksgiving, supplication. When you pray, it's all covered. We go before God to ask him, to adore him, to say I'm sorry, and say thank you.